Good morning and welcome to Rising. Thank you so much for tuning in. It is the final days of the Biden administration, and there are weighty world events taking place. Possible peace finally at last in Gaza between Israel and Hamas. We have a few guests today to discuss that, so that will be coming up in just a bit. I am joined, as usual, by Niall Stanage. Nice to see you, my friend.
Good to see you. How are you today, Robby?
I am just fine. It's another frigid day in the nation's capital as we prepare for the disruptions to the streets and parking that will ensue on Monday for the inauguration. They've told us not to bother driving into this building. We are right by the Capitol.
Exactly. So a new president then, but a current president on his way out. And I believe that may be on your radar, Robby.
Yes, indeed. Well, President Joe Biden did in fact deliver his final address as president last night. He emphasized what successes that he thinks he achieved as president, while excoriating various forces that he believes are having a pernicious effect on American politics, in particular, the so-called tech leaders. Biden warned that an oligarchy is taking shape in America. No doubt he was thinking of Elon Musk and perhaps Mark Zuckerberg, who have decisively abandoned the Democratic Party. One detects notes of bitterness. So long as tech leaders, innovators, and businessmen were willing to go along with the Democrats, they were viewed positively. But now that they're no longer going to do Biden's bidding and censor Republican speech, suddenly they're oligarchs. He also hit out at progressives' favorite boogeyman, mis- and disinformation, an avalanche of which he says is burying the truth.
Americans are being buried under an avalanche of misinformation and disinformation, enabling the abuse of power. The free press is crumbling. Editors are disappearing. Social media is giving up on fact-checking. The truth is smothered by lies told for power and for profit. We must hold the social platforms accountable to protect our children, our families, and our very democracy from the abuse of power.
Now, here at Rising, we've litigated whether fact-checkers censoring speech on social media is a good idea or a bad idea a number of times. Hint, I think it's a bad idea, as most of you watching probably know. We've discussed that so many times on the show that I don't feel any need to do so right now. The reality is that the American people don't agree with Biden on any of this. The truth is no one is buying what he's selling. Biden's final days in office are an occasion to mark his legacy and his numerous failures. Look, that's not just my opinion. It's the opinion of, again, the voters. In a devastating final poll released by CNN, Biden's approval ratings are now as low as at any other point during his presidency. Just 36% of Americans approve of Biden's job performance. His favorability rating is 33%. Overall, 61% of Americans view the Biden presidency as a failure. Now, that reflects widespread disapproval of his administration among Republicans and independents. 71% of Democrats judge him a success, which is obviously a more appealing number, though it's still something of an indictment in these extremely partisan times to only get 70% of your own constituency. Despite what the mainstream media would have you believe about the obviousness of Donald Trump's unfitness for office, Republicans just don't see it that way. Trump is far, far more popular among the entirety of the Republican Party than Joe Biden is among Democrats. Now, that point was raised by CNN conservative commentator Scott Jennings, his own response to Biden's address. Let's watch that.
I think the way he's leaving office has been, frankly, pretty terrible. He's going to be remembered for a few things, but politically, it's mostly for when he was vice president, he and Obama sort of ushering in the Trump era initially, and then as he's leaving office as president, bringing back Trump and Trumpism stronger and more popular than ever. Today, Biden has like a 61% disapproval, and Trump is over a 50% approval and more popular, and his ideology is more popular than it's ever been. If everything you say is true, the Democrats should have had no trouble getting reelected in this election, yet they were.
It's an issue of a communications failure.
I know, and for Democrats, it's always been about communication and no introspection about the policies that led to him leaving office as one of the most unpopular presidents. When I watch this tonight, I remain astonished that he, his family, and other people around him thought he could ever run for another term. I mean, there's no way he could serve another 6 months, let alone another 4 years. The fact that they pursued that farce for as long as they did, to me, remains one of the most astonishing things about this term.
Now, even many progressives are recognizing the failures of the Biden administration. Yesterday, American foreign policy and indeed the cause of global peace achieved an important goal: a possible end to the catastrophic war in Gaza agreed to by Israel and Hamas. Now, it's unclear as to what will happen as Netanyahu is wobbling, but peace is closer than it's ever been. Credit for this fragile peace is being widely attributed to the actions not of Joe Biden, but of Donald Trump, who, according to reports, pushed the Israelis to accept a deal, something Joe Biden had failed to do throughout his presidency. As Washington Post columnist Shadi Hamid put it, Biden was completely unwilling to put any real pressure on Israel to accept a ceasefire. Trump doesn't care about any of the norms of treating Israel with kid gloves. He wanted a deal. Biden never wanted one enough. That's not some weird pro-Trump revisionist history. That's an opinion from the liberal, mainstream Washington Post. There's no way around it. Biden failed massively on numerous fronts, keeping prices down and creating an economy that works for all Americans, preparing the country to be a safe harbor for innovators and job creators, and leading on the global stage in a way that inspires our allies and defends American values abroad without absent-mindedly letting the world plunge into World War III. At the end of the day, it seems inevitable to conclude anything but this: Biden was just not respected by other world leaders, friends and adversaries included. What they say was what you saw, what we saw. This was a very, very old man, out of his depths and aged. At some point over the last 4 years, he ceased being physically and mentally capable of doing the job of president. Look, you might not love everything about Donald Trump. I certainly don't. When Trump does or says things I don't agree with, I will be the first one to call him out. You know, if you've been watching for a long time, I have no problem criticizing him. That's my promise to you as we enter a second Trump presidency. But look, we need a leader who can actually do the job. I hope, at long last, Joe Biden enjoys his retirement.
Well, Robbie, that was quite a, what would be the word?
Signing off.
Attack, a signing off. So I want to take issue with some things there. Firstly, I thought the most interesting part of Biden's farewell address was this idea of the tech industrial complex and the idea that there was an oligarchy forming in the United States. Whether one thinks it has recently formed or has been forming over quite a few decades, I do actually think the word oligarch is very appropriate for someone like Elon Musk, who spent roughly $250 million trying to get Donald Trump elected, who owns a major social media platform which at least we think is being algorithmically tweaked in some way to at least promote views in line with Musk's, but more to the point, who has billions and billions of dollars worth of federal contracts with the government. So the idea that, I mean, you know, what's an oligarch? It is someone who uses vast wealth to influence the political system in their own favor. I think that's an entirely fair characterization of Elon Musk, actually.
Well, he is using his wealth to influence the political system. It would be just crazy for me to pretend that's not what's happening. He exerts a massive influence over Donald Trump currently. Now, I mostly think that influence is for the good because I tend to agree with the policies of Elon Musk, and I think that his companies are good innovations for America. That includes Tesla and SpaceX, and I want these things to succeed.
That's a means versus the ends kind of argument, though. It's like it's okay for the world's richest man to spend $250 million electing someone because I agree with him.
Well, it's okay to do, like, it's okay on what level? It is permitted under our current right. No one is claiming that he's doing in the election sense. He's spending his money to get some kind of political end. Just like, I mean, Kamala has millionaire and billionaire supporters too. Now we might not like that level of moneyed influence on politics. I'm willing to concede that is not necessarily ideal in all cases. I think my only issue is that I think efforts to grapple with that are very prone to backfiring and are maybe just not permitted under our constitutional system because our Supreme Court has said money is closely related to speech, if not speech itself, and we can't regulate that. And also previous attempts to do campaign finance reform or whatever you want to call it, have, in my view, just created weird little additional loopholes for better connected people to jump through, like the whole PAC system. You're not giving directly to the candidate now, you're giving to a PAC and the PAC gives to the candidate. Well, who does this actually help?
Right.
It helps people who have political action committees and who can hire, armies of lawyers to make sure it's all being done properly. This is getting a little specific, but look, I'm not rejecting your argument that this is something to be concerned about. I think the federal contracts in particular, certainly, if someone is serving as de facto leader of the country and then profits because their businesses rely on the federal contracts, I don't think that's ideal.
I mean, he's been put in a situation with this kind of quasi-department, DOGE, which is not an official department, but it's nevertheless him and Vivek Ramaswamy primarily, who are being charged or given the responsibility by the incoming President of the United States to vastly cut and transform the federal government, in which they have a financial interest, particularly in Elon's case, in doing so.
Yes, but if they transform the federal government, look, I'm just looking at results. It sounds like they want to transform the federal government along the following ways. Eliminate certain agencies or departments or lower the federal workforce, including by looking at defense cuts, which is something you're interested in. And then Elon doesn't want to ban TikTok. Elon wants to keep the H-1B visas. These are policy fights in between the more populist NatCon side of Republican politics and the tech libertarian people. I'm, full disclosure, very clearly on this side.
Sure.
And so these are my people influencing the Republican Party in a direction that I want it to be influenced. So that's why I want them to call them oligarchs if you want, but I want them to keep that influence.
I will call them oligarchs, but let me get briefly to the Biden position. As you well know, and as our audience knows, I am not a big cheerleader for Joe Biden. I think the policy on Israel and Gaza has been disgraceful, honestly, and I think he has been ineffective in a number of ways. Let me just briefly make a couple of points in his defense. The COVID response in terms of actually getting vaccinations into people was quite effective. $1 trillion infrastructure bill, $370 billion to try to combat climate change, and other more concrete achievements that never got much attention, or at least didn't get Biden the credit he wanted, like, for example, the issue of capping the price of insulin for seniors at a monthly level. Those things, I think, did not form some sort of compelling narrative of his presidency. He was obviously going to lose if he'd gone forward for a second term. I think there were things in which he was ineffectual, but certainly a lot of people, even on the Liberal side, even who have criticisms of him, would argue, I think, that his failing was one of being often ineffectual, whereas the reason Liberals have such trepidation about the return of Trump is that they believe he's an active danger to American democracy.
Sure. The foreign policy failures, more than anything else, seem to me like they might be specifically related to Biden's cognitive, physical ability, age. The fact that it seems like Donald Trump and his people were able to say, hey, get this done, we are pushing for this, in a way that Biden didn't, says something. Now, we're going to discuss that, and it's not totally cleared yet. It seems like Netanyahu has perhaps some incentive personally to scuttle it because his political future might be in jeopardy if it goes forward. We're going to be talking about that today with Trita Parsi and Hen Mazig separately, a more very much pro-Israel guest and someone who has a more dissenting opinion on Israel's role in the Middle East. So we're going to be exploring that in much greater detail today on Rising. Stay tuned for more. No love lost between the Bidens and Nancy Pelosi.
The Washington Post interviewed Jill Biden, who spoke about her relationship with Pelosi for a piece titled, "Jill Biden Still Hopes for a Good Ending."
Now, when the interviewer brought up the topic, Jill said, "I've been thinking a lot about my relationships." The article continues, her face nearly pearlescent, I'm not sure I know that word, pearlescent, with lustrous foundation, betrays no particular emotion. She's holding a china cup. Tea with honey and lemon. It's been on my mind lately, and then Jill pauses. We were friends for 50 years. She is using her teacher's voice now. It was disappointing. Jill did say she was at peace with the way everything ended, but she was disappointed in how it unfolded.
She told the Post that she learned a lot about human nature, and that was all she was going to say.
Now here's a flashback of Pelosi practically cackling about her role in booting Biden out of the presidential race.
Many times when I'm encouraging people to run, especially more women, to run for office, nothing more wholesome than our political process than that. Aren't we excited about...
Yes, and sometimes you're discouraging people to run. We're not going to get into that.
No,
whatever.
People make their own decisions.
Absolutely they do. Absolutely they do. But I just want to say from the bottom of my heart, thank you so much for what you didn't do.
Political commentator Steve Cortes reacted on X. Jill Biden will never get over Nancy Pelosi knifing Joe Biden and ending her reign as shadow president.
Pollster Nate Silver wrote, I stopped watching the show, House of Cards, after, but Jill Biden has Claire Underwood vibes.
Commentator and former original, I believe, Rising host Buck Sexton said, Dr. Jill Biden was unable to diagnose that Pelosi is a horrible person.
Well, I mean, some of the comments there from particularly the right-leaning commentators, whatever. I mean, I don't think Nancy Pelosi is a horrible person. I do think Nancy Pelosi is an incredibly ruthless person in a very brutal business. And it kind of tickled me at the time because Biden had said that he was going to stay in the race, and Pelosi popped up on Morning Joe to encourage him to make a decision, which he had.
He'd already made the decision. Yes, that was the.
He'd made the wrong decision.
That was
though.
It's his decision to make, and we hope that he makes it.
Right.
He's made it. He's running. Yes, and he can make whatever decision he wants, and we look forward to hearing what it is. It was hysterical.
It was, and I mean,
it was very mob-like.
Well,
it reminded me of this conversation. I love The Sopranos so much. When the big boss orders tells one of his underlings to stop messing with Tony, the main character's business, and he's not listening to him. So then he calls Tony and says, yeah, John's not hearing me. And Tony says, what are you going to do about it? And the boss says, nothing. And Tony says, okay, then we'll talk. Tony says, are you saying what I'm saying? What I think you're saying? I didn't say anything. Okay, talk to you later. It was authorization to kill that person.
Sure,
it's amazing.
Sure. No, it is. And a lot of the whole shenanigans around the Pelosi pressure to get Biden to drop out had that kind of vibe. I wish I could remember at the Democratic convention, by which time, of course, he had dropped out. She was there briefly with her little sign that everyone had been passed. It was like, thank you, Joe, or something. And she was sitting in the front row with her, like, thank you, Joe sign, having completely knifed the guy. Now, I understand that conservatives dislike Nancy Pelosi because they dislike what she believes in, but she has been an extraordinarily effective political operator, and she's hard as nails, which is one of the reasons that I kind of like her. I think that she was pivotal in the past to things like then President Obama getting the Affordable Care Act through. I know that outrages conservatives, but it delights liberals and has involved a big expansion of health insurance to people. Jill Biden, I mean, on a personal level, I have some sympathy for watching that happen to a spouse. I mean, that must have been very painful. I never really bought this idea of her as a shadow president.
I don't either, but...
Commentator said that. But
I don't buy the idea of her actually like running the government or something, but it does seem like Biden's decision to stay in the race for it was like 2 or 3 weeks, right, following the debate where he was still, maybe at least 2, where he was sticking it out, that seemed to be significantly motivated by her and also Hunter Biden. There was reporting, again, this isn't from like right-wing sites, it was in the New York Times, that he had surrounded himself with Hunter and Jill to make the decision to stay. And Hunter in particular, it seemed like, well, that could be he could have a personal reason to want you to stay in the race. Maybe they're not giving you the best advice. Obviously, your family's going to support you. But also, sometimes it is the job of your family to, it's difficult to rein in an elderly family member. A lot of people go through this with their parents or grandparents, want to keep living by themselves, but it's time to get them into an assisted living type thing, and they resist it. We went through that with like my great-great-grandmother or that kind of thing. Mm-hmm. It can be tough. And now the thing is not moving the guy into assisted living, but having him no longer have the most important job on earth as the world is on fire.
Yeah. There is also, I think, an additional point related to that, but not solely pertaining to the family, which this goes for politics generally, not just Biden. Staff have a vested interest in the person remaining in office,
Yes.
Almost
Not
all the
just the
time.
family, the staff.
Yeah,
yes.
because it's their jobs, and people who are close to Biden aren't as close to other politicians. If once Kamala Harris became the nominee, they were kind of sidelined, and so getting honest advice, that honest advice should have come from the family, and it seemed like the family were perhaps loyally, I would argue mistakenly, trying to press Biden and press the Democratic Party for him to
When
stay.
it was still a lot of the same people, the campaign continuity was a lot of the same people.
Generally,
that was, to the extent, Kamala was just set up for failure because she needed to make a much harder break from Biden and Bidenism, I suspect, in order to have more of a chance. And those people were just not going to do that because they'd be throwing themselves under the bus.
Yeah, Jen O'Malley Dillon and so on was a part of the continuity. I'm thinking more of those sort of old school Biden lieutenants, people like McDonnell and all that. But yeah, absolutely.
All right, well, we wish Dr. Jill Biden well. We'll be back with more Rising right after this. 72 civilians have been killed in Gaza since a ceasefire deal between Israel and Hamas was announced on Wednesday. And Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu did pump the brakes on Thursday, saying, quote, a last-minute crisis with Hamas is holding up this deal. That is despite this from U.S. President Joe Biden on Wednesday. Let's listen.
I'm deeply satisfied this day has finally come, for the sake of the people of Israel and the families waiting in agony, and for the sake of the innocent people in Gaza who suffered unimaginable devastation because of the war. The Palestinian people have gone through hell. Too many innocent people have died. Too many communities have been destroyed. And this deal, the people of Gaza can finally recover and rebuild.
Incoming President Donald Trump jumped on Truth Social, writing, quote, this epic ceasefire agreement could have only happened as a result of our historic victory in November, as it signaled to the entire world that my administration would seek peace and negotiate deals to ensure the safety of all Americans and our allies.
But the deal is delayed. In a new article, a frequent critic of the Biden administration's handling of the Gaza war, Trita Parsi, not only highlights that President-elect Trump undoubtedly played a role in helping push the agreement through, he also says it's time to acknowledge that Biden has been complicit in the horrors of the 15-month war. That war unfolded after the October 7th, 2023 Hamas attack on Israel, killing over 1,200 Israelis with around 250 taken hostage. In Gaza, more than 46,000 Palestinians, mostly women and children, have been killed. There's barely anything left standing there. Joining us now to discuss what the next steps might be is Trita Parsi, the Executive Vice President of the Quincy Institute for Responsible Statecraft. Welcome, Trita.
Thank you so much for having me.
So, to start off, as it were, at the beginning, why do you think this deal, setting aside for a second whether it ultimately holds or not, why do you think this deal was agreed to right now?
I think it's quite clear that the Trump factor here was quite important. We have a diplomat quoted in the Washington Post who points out that for the first time, there was actually real pressure on the Israelis. And this is why they agreed, at least temporarily, to the ceasefire. We'll see if they stick to that agreement, which suggests something that I think many of us knew and we saw, but it was interesting to get that confirmation of it, which is that for the last 15 months, the Biden administration has not put any real pressure on Israel in order to agree to a ceasefire. They could have, they should have, they had all the leverage in the world to do so, but every day for the last 15 months, Joe Biden woke up and chose not to use that leverage and not to put on that pressure. Had he done so, we could have gotten this deal much earlier. As you all know, the draft of this agreement is pretty much the same one that was agreed upon by the U.S. and Hamas earlier last summer. So the opportunity to resolve this has always been there. The Biden administration has chosen not to use it. With Trump coming in, clearly, he seems to have a different attitude towards this. He did say during the campaign that he wanted the killing to end. Why exactly it is that he wants to end this is not clear. Is it because he wants to pave the way to further expand the Abraham Accord, which I think would be a mistake? Is it because he has given the Israelis some sort of a promise that if they agree to this, he will be more helpful to them vis-a-vis Iran, potentially even kinetically? We do not know. It may also have been that he didn't give them any promise at all. Instead, just simply said, enough is enough. That would have been a fully legitimate thing to say.
I'm going to make a statement, and then you tell me if you agree with it or if I've gone off track somewhere. It seems to me that it's actually not that anomalous or unusual what Donald Trump has done here in saying, okay, you were attacked, you took out a lot of terrorists, this has gotten too catastrophic, and it must end, there's a line, it's too much. That is actually not strange at all, because it's something that past presidents, both Republicans and Democrats, have done. What was anomalous was Joe Biden's behavior, just with there being no limit and no desire to exercise pressure. What Donald Trump, for him being described by so many people in mainstream media as this breaker of norms, as this reckless figure who is so out of step with the traditions of the American presidents, we've had presidents, Republicans and Democrats, strong supporters of Israel's right to defend itself, but saying at some point, that is enough, no more of this, this is jeopardizing the region's entire security and our own security, and then they fall back. It was Joe Biden who stands out as different from the pack. Am I wrong?
I think you're absolutely right. And at the end of the day, as you have pointed out correctly, there has been limits set by other presidents. Limits that may have been too wide in the view of some or too strict in the view of some, but they were limits. What we saw with the Biden administration is that they pursued what they themselves called a bear hug strategy. The idea that if you just give everything the Israelis want, you defend them at every point internationally, you veto every resolution at the UN that calls for them to stop the fighting, you give them whatever weapon system they want with no restriction. If you do all of those things, then perhaps the Israelis will listen to you and you will have credibility. I think it's just an absolutely preposterous strategy, because first of all, it presumes that the United States didn't have any credibility with Israel and had to build it. I don't think that's the case at all. And secondly, even though Biden did all of these things, he nevertheless, according to Biden officials themselves, including listening to what the Biden's ambassador to Israel said in his exit interview with Times of Israel, he said, at no point did we tell the Israelis to stop the war, to stop the killing, he actually said. So they pursued a strategy that essentially decentered American policy from American interest, deferred it, abdicated it to the Israeli prime minister, and there were no limits. Whatever the Israelis wanted, they got. And at the end of the day, what was the result? It was a complete disaster, because it's not as if Netanyahu is some sort of a saint who was pursuing the policies of Israel for Israel's best interests. He had his own clear self-interest, including prolonging the war in order to avoid the collapse of his government. And this is a potential key factor as to why he's backtracking from the deal right now. So I think if Biden actually had followed the previous presidents, as you pointed out, and actually had some limit, made sure that the policy of the United States was centered on U.S. interest and making sure that if the Israelis were going in directions that were detrimental to U.S. interest, to regional stability, the vocabulary word of no would be used occasionally, we would have been in a completely different situation. Thousands of people would not have gotten killed. Hundreds of hostages would likely have been released alive much earlier than what is happening right now. And this is going to haunt the United States, I fear, for years, perhaps generations, just as the Iraq War has had significant negative reverberations for the United States for many, many years. And I think a key reason for that is because Biden chose to go down this path. He wasn't forced to. It wasn't as if he wanted to go a different path, but he couldn't. His hands were tied. None of that is true. He chose this path, and it was a disastrous path for the region, for the Israelis, for Palestinians, and of course for the United States as well.
Trita, I broadly share many of those views, but I do want to broaden out the discussion a little bit, because obviously there are other big players in the region, notably Iran and Saudi Arabia. You mentioned, I think, in your first answer, you were musing as to what Trump's motivations might be if indeed he did put greater pressure on Israel. Firstly, is Saudi Arabia and the perhaps the possibility of some kind of recognition of Israel? Do you think that's part of this equation? And then where does Iran fit into it all? Because we hear these arguments made that Iran has been weakened by Israeli attacks on Hezbollah, by the fall of Assad, and so on and so forth. I know those are big topics, but can you just at least touch on those?
Yeah. So on the first question, Trump, I think, suggested himself on social media that he would like to use this ceasefire to further integrate Israel into the region. And I think that on the face of it is a good idea. Of course, if it is coupled with real peace. I think where it would be problematic is if Trump continues on the path that Biden picked up from Trump himself with the Abraham Accords, because those agreements, those normalization agreements, had several significant flaws. The first one being that they completely neglected and shoved the Palestinians under the rug. I think it should be quite clear to everyone that is impossible to do. If you do that, you will invite further violence and destabilization. And I think there is an argument to be made that October 7th, to some extent at least, was driven by the effort by the Abraham Accords to just completely sidestep the Palestinians. Secondly, there's a massive amount of American concessions for these normalization agreements. In the case of Morocco, for instance, the United States recognized Morocco's occupation of West Sahara. You had Sudan taking off the terrorist list. The UAE got a bunch of weapons. And you know, all of this in order for them to agree to normalize relations with Israel. In the case of Saudi Arabia, the Biden administration has pursued security guarantees to Saudi Arabia, meaning that the United States would send its women and men off to kill and die for the Saudi royal family and the dictatorship there. Given the fact that a principle that Trump seems to have been quite close to is the idea that the United States should actually reduce its military engagement in the region and have less entanglements in the Middle East. If Trump were to go forward with an Abrams Accord that actually involves a security guarantee to Saudi Arabia, it would actually increase America's military commitment, entanglement in the region beyond any point in U.S. history. So I think that would be a huge mistake. If Saudi Arabia and Israel wants to normalize relations, that's great. Let them have them normalize it. Why does the United States have to give concessions for that to happen if this is something that both of these countries wants to do? And certainly, why should the United States commit U.S. troops for the security of either one of these states for them to be able to normalize?
Trita Parsi, thank you so much for joining us to break that down. We really appreciate it.
Appreciate it. Thank you so much.
As a flurry of major companies have scaled back their DEI initiatives within the last year, one company is taking a different path.
Retail giant Costco is resisting pressure from a conservative activist group to drop its DEI initiatives.
The National Center for Public Policy Research wants Costco to write up a report about the risks that DEI policies pose to the company. It's clear that DEI holds litigation, reputational, and financial risks to the company, said that center in a shareholder proposal.
According to the Wall Street Journal, however, one Costco executive is claiming that the company's strength allows them to defy such demands. For instance, each year the company retains 92% of its United States members who have to pay a fee.
Conservative activist Robby Soave, the other Robby out there, played a major role in pressuring several companies like John Deere, Harley-Davidson, and Tractor Supply to scale back their DEI initiatives. Now, when it comes to Costco, however, Starbuck told the Wall Street Journal they are not the worst of the worst, so they weren't my focus. That's what he said. He added that it would take more than a shareholder proposal to spur change at Costco and that he might target the company in the future, but you better have your ducks in a row before you go after a beloved company.
Costco, citing their customer feedback, said that their shoppers like seeing diversity in the company's workforce. And the Wall Street Journal writes, quote, Costco's efforts to diversify its workforce and supplier base help attract talent and spur innovation in its merchandise, promoting the treasure hunt that our customers value, its board wrote. Our commitment to an enterprise rooted in respect and inclusion is appropriate and necessary. Activist Amy Siskind gave Costco a shout-out on Blue Sky, Robbie's favourite site, writing, Apple's board votes no to investor efforts to end the company's DEI efforts. Thank you, Apple and Costco. We see and appreciate you. Journalist Jeff Jarvis, one of my favourites, wrote that Costco keeping DEI policies is both the right thing to do and good business.
Meanwhile, conservative author and founder of the Flag Foundation, Nick Adams, a favorite commentator of mine, wrote, he's Australian, right? Major announcement in the wake of President Trump's victory, Coscto tripled down on wokeness and DEI, boycott. Fox Business correspondent Charles Gasparino piled on, writing, looks like Costco is just begging to get sued because DEI is actually illegal, as I point out in my book, Go Woke, Go Broke. So the pernicious reach of DEI is still a factor at the Costco warehouses.
A defiant stance by Costco, making the case, as they should, for the importance of DEI initiatives, for the potential business benefits to them, for the idea that they not only diversify thought and experience and insight within the company itself, but are appreciated by the customer base.
I mean, here's where the rubber meets the road. What do we mean when we say DEI?
Well, that's a fair
question. If what we mean is we're making sure to do outreach to whatever, to traditionally marginalized groups or groups of people who might not know that there are good opportunities to come work at Costco, to come shop at Costco, that it is an appealing place to work, that it has a good packages and benefits, and it's an appealing company, and you might not know about these opportunities. Here, that is all fine. If that's what we mean by DEI, I don't oppose any of that, and conservatives don't oppose any of that.
We'll get back to that in a second. But anyway,
no, they don't. What they oppose is there must be at least however much of our workforce that is black or Latino or a woman or gay or whatever, and that we are going to lower our qualifications to hire more of those people. Or reserve a certain number of jobs for those people, or not hire someone who is extremely qualified because we want a less qualified person who goes into one of those groups. That's what Gasparino is saying is, I mean, we debate this, we argue about whether this is even legal or not, because in other circumstances you can't not hire someone because of that, you can't racially discriminate against someone, and what many on the right would argue is that if you're doing this kind of hiring, then you are in effect practicing racial discrimination or discrimination of another kind. So that I am totally against, but they can absolutely say, we want to make sure black people or gay people or whoever, trans people, handicapped people, whoever, know that there are job opportunities here that might suit their talents, and that would be great. All for that. I'm for that. Maybe there are conservatives who aren't for that, but I'm for that.
I'm glad that you are, and I think it's to your credit that you are. I'm not at all persuaded that that is a uniform or even overwhelming conservative belief, where I think there is a blanket skepticism of DEI and of often the words themselves among people of a conservative disposition who automatically leap to the assumption that it is anti-white discrimination or anti-male discrimination. I think that it is worth noting that quotas are illegal. You can't actually say, we are going to set, you can set objectives, but you can't say there is a quota for this, that, or the other. And so I think that it's important to sort of nail that canard.
The other component of what we're talking about when we talk about DEI that I do find objectionable, and maybe you might as well under certain circumstances, there is a training seminar component to a lot of DEI. There's an entire DEI industry of so-called experts on this subject who come in, who are paid a lot of money to come into companies and schools and put on training seminars that, I'm painting with a broad brush here because some of them might have more validity than others, but I tend to think these things are not particularly rigorous from a scientific perspective in terms of improving employee morale or employee relations. In fact, there are numerous studies or investigative reports not by crazy right-wing people, but by good, respectable liberals saying that the evidence that this makes things better is very scant. And in fact, there are even situations where this has made people more suspicious or hostile to each other based on the activism of the person doing the training. If you look through some of these materials, which are occasionally available online, you start going, what the hell is this? I don't want people learning. This is insane. No, so that we want to, I'm not saying it should be illegal. I'm just,
Yeah, no, look, I think that there are I mean, of course one can be skeptical or opposed to specific things in the training or whatever, but I think that sometimes the excesses of those training materials or whatever is used to push back against the obvious reality that there are groups in this country who have suffered historical discrimination of a severe nature, and that the legacy of that continues, and that trying to redress that imbalance is a fair and useful thing to do. I also think, incidentally, Robby, and this gets back to the Coscto point, that their argument is yes, partly about those fundamental principles of fairness, but also about the idea that it is in fact good business. Jamie Dimon from Chase has made a broadly similar argument at times, that in fact it is advantageous in a business sense to have a diverse workforce, a workforce that is representative of the nation at large, partly as a bulwark against groupthink, and partly because it simply makes the enterprise more appealing to a greater number of people.
Yeah, it's a subtly different, but not entirely different mantra. I would just have these companies say, right, we obviously practice non-discrimination because discrimination is illegal and because we believe in non-discrimination, and we are welcoming to all, and we want to find opportunities for all sorts of previously underrepresented people, and we want a positive work environment no matter your creed or ideology or ethnicity or any of that. The only time in my professional career that I've ever had to do anything approaching one of these training seminars, before I was in media, a long time ago, back in college, I did like summer job. I did door-to-door sales for a large cable company, one of the main ones. It was actually a good job. It was a well-paying job. I wasn't very good at selling cable, but I had less self-confidence back then. I didn't like knocking on people's doors and bothering them. But we had to do a lot of training seminars, and I was in there was like, I don't know, dozens, hundreds of us in this door-to-door sales program for college kids. A lot of black people, and they all had to do this training seminar too, because you can't just make the white people do it. Sure. And they all thought it was ludicrous. Right. They thought it was no one thought it was more ludicrous than they did. They're all making fun of it. And so maybe that's colored my perspective on it.
I think that there are no Latino person that I personally know likes the term Latinx. Yes. I mean, that is just seemingly disparaged all the time. But that is, again, to cite a specific that is often used to discredit the whole overall effort. And I don't think that should be done, because I think the overall effort is worthwhile and important and necessary. And before we wrap, I just want to give a shout out to the CEO of Costco, who actually got an email from some customer who was complaining or questioning whether they hired on the basis of skin color or gender identification. And this Costco CEO wrote back explaining that they did not have quotas, but that they were committed to fairness. And if these are the policies that you see as offensive, I must tell you, I'm not prepared to change. Good for him. We need more of that, more of people standing up for what they believe, rather than running scared the first time they get any public criticism of it.
Do you shop at Costco now?
I am not a Costco member, but I mean, I barely need it. Maybe I should. Maybe I should give them my business now.
When I lived in Arlington, I would shop regularly at Costco, but I think I let my subscription, my membership lapse.
Well, just don't boycott them on account of their commitment to
No, I don't do no boycotting over here. I'm gonna shop where I will, regardless of people's political stances. More Rising right after this.
The 15-month war between Israel and Hamas has fractured opinion around the world, pitting those who are pro-Palestine and those who are pro-Israel fiercely against each other. One of the most visible people breaking through the noise is 34-year-old Israeli influencer Hen Mazik. He's been the target of fierce criticism, but that hasn't stopped him. He spends his time between Tel Aviv, London and LA, where he leads workshops and virtual seminars advising pro-Israel celebrities like Deborah Messing, who want to use their platforms to speak out in support of the Jewish state.
Now, with the ceasefire hanging in the balance after it was announced yesterday, the question remains about the current mood in Israel and what is going to happen next. Joining us now from London is Senior Fellow at the Tel Aviv Institute, Hen Mazig. Thank you so much for being on Rising once again.
Thanks for having me again.
So what is the mood in Israel as this deal appeared to be going through, but we are now, of course, grappling with reporting that it has not yet been voted on by Israeli leadership. My understanding is there would certainly be relief at hostages finally coming home, but of course a reticence to give any sort of deal with Hamas, considered a terrorist group by Israelis. What is your view on what's taking place?
I think that majority of Israelis support a deal to release the hostages. It's something that many Israelis have been advocating for. We wanted our hostages home, and Israel has went to such a length and agreed to so many conditions that the terrorist organization Hamas has set forth, doing things that I can't even imagine that America would ever do if there was a similar situation of hostages. I mean, there were similar situations of hostages being held by terror groups, and the American policy was often we don't negotiate with terrorists. But it's different because Israel is a tiny country with 10 million citizens, and I think that we all know people that have been affected by this war. We all know people that might be related to hostages. There's always a second or third degree of separation, and that's why it's so personal for us. And while many critics were saying that this deal is perhaps Israel saying to the terrorists that this is an act that they should continue taking, stealing hostages, I think that it's a different message. The message that myself and many Israelis are receiving today is that Israel would do everything they can to release those hostages. There's a baby that is celebrating 2 years in captivity. It's just going to turn 2 this Saturday. We need those hostages back home. So I mean, like most Israelis, accept this deal and celebrate the fact that our family and our loved ones are coming back home.
Do we know what the sticking points are that Prime Minister Netanyahu is alluding to? Because I have seen him talk about the idea that he contends that Hamas is erecting some sort of last-minute obstacle. Hamas representatives deny doing that, but without getting too deep into the granular detail, do we know generally what those sticking points are?
I wouldn't take anything that is coming out of the Prime Minister's office or Hamas at this critical stage as seriously as I would the mediators. So if you listen to John Kirby from the State Department, he mentioned today, just recently, that those conditions or those issues that they still have in the negotiation are very minor, and that the deal is still standing, and they're going to carry on with it. So I think that there probably are issues, but I don't think that it's anything that will stop this deal from taking place. And we needed the specific timing, this time frame between Biden leaving office and Trump assuming office to be together and engage in solving this conflict, to pressure all parties. And I think that's the reason that we're seeing this deal. And I think that this timing will not come back. So I do think that this deal would see it through.
Donald Trump, at least from the American standpoint, is currently getting, I would say, the lion's share of the credit, even from people who are very critical in American media of Donald Trump, saying it seems to be his intervention that is making this deal take place. Do you have any insights along those lines?
I think that he should get credit. There's definitely influence from Trump and his team on this deal. But again, I don't think that it would have happened by Trump alone. I think that the long-term pressure and involvement from the current leadership in America has definitely contributed to it. And I think that it's as I said, it's this specific time of having one president leaving and another one coming in, both of them taking credit for this deal. So I'm definitely certain that Trump had a lot to do with it, but I don't think it's Trump alone that secured this deal.
In relation to the Israeli domestic political situation as it pertains to this deal, obviously Mr. Netanyahu leads a coalition government. Some of the members of that coalition are to his right. Itamar Ben-Gvir, the National Security Minister, and Bezalel Smotrich, the Finance Minister, are the two most prominent, I would say, or most often cited. Do we know, does Netanyahu, are there concerns there about that government falling if they oppose this deal particularly fiercely? Have they talked about, I know they have criticised the deal, but have they talked about quitting the government or not? Where do those kind of dynamics stand?
Yeah, they absolutely have spoken about withdrawing from the government. If we're talking specifically about those two ministers, Minister Ben-Gvir and Minister Smotrich, have both opposed the deal. Recently, we heard that Smotrich said that he would stay in the government and his condition is that the war would continue after the deal for the release of the hostages. Ben-Gvir, on his part, has said that he was the reason that Israel did not achieve this deal because he's been pushing against it for months. It's much like any government around the world. You have those extreme fractions that often are the loudest and making and have too much influence in my eyes. I think that Netanyahu is definitely concerned about his political future, and I'm certain that Trump taking office is another issue that Netanyahu is considering. He wants to maintain a relationship with Trump. I think he's been waiting for that for this specific president for years now. And for him, I think he's not going to do anything to jeopardize his relationship with Trump before Trump took office. And Trump does really want this deal. So in a way, I think that Trump's taking office as president is actually pressuring Netanyahu to secure this deal and to see it through.
And one final question before we wrap this up. And in terms of opinion within Israel, obviously people are going to have different views about this deal. It's a multi-phase deal. There are various conditions on both sides that have to be met. But how would you characterize the mood among Israelis that you know about it? Are people relieved, happy, wary? What's the sentiment just among people in your circle?
Israelis around me are celebrating this deal. We are tired. We want our hostages back. We want to see them home, and we want the bloodshed to end. Every week we hear about dozens of soldiers that are being killed in this war, and we want it to end. But while I'm seeing videos coming out of Gaza of Gazans celebrating together with Hamas that came out of the tunnels where they hide under civilians and celebrating this as if it's a victory, which is a very bizarre thing for me to think that people that have suffered so much and what some have called it a genocide are now celebrating in the streets and as if they won something. How can you celebrate a victory this way? In the meantime, in Israel, the people are broken. The people just want this to end, and we want it to end not to secure victory, and that's why we were willing to give over thousands of Hamas terrorists in exchange for innocent lives, in exchange for a baby. But I think that's the difference between the two sides, and I think that the important part here is to look into the future of Gaza and look into the future of Gazans, and not. I think that's something that we have been failing so much, the Israel and the West, in securing a future for them where they are safe, where Hamas is not involved, when Hamas is not controlling them, and give them security and dignity. But we have to find an alternative to Hamas, and that's something that I think everyone in this negotiations has failed. So I'm really hopeful that they will focus on that for the sake of both Israelis and Palestinians and every innocent person living in this land.
Hen Mazzig, a senior fellow at the Tel Aviv Institute. Thanks for joining us on Rising.
Thanks for having me.
For TikTok, the end is nigh. Millions of Americans, 170 million to be exact, are on the edge of their seat to find out whether the ban will go into effect on Sunday. Now, the reason is that the Chinese-owned app is alleged to be a threat to national security, but many users, especially teens, aren't waiting for total darkness.
We should have the right to go to all of these apps, and we should have the free speech in America to do this.
When I saw the hashtag TikTok refugee, I was like, oh my gosh, that feels so dramatic and whatever. So like I even put in my bio, I think I put TikTok migrant.
So the app you saw there at the start is called Rednote, and that app is calling itself a home for TikTok refugees. But guess what? That app, along with Lemonade, are also owned by China.
As of Wednesday, Rednote was the top free app on both Apple and Android. Its feed is nearly identical to TikTok's, with an endless scroll of photos and short-form videos.
Independent journalist Taylor Lorenz writes on X, "Follow me on Rednote, the hottest new social app in America."
And Wokeness writes on X, liberals are flocking to Rednote, an app controlled by China, to replace TikTok. Turns out they ban LGBTQ content, all inappropriate outfits, and only to genders. But Rednote also collects the same data as TikTok. So why just ban TikTok? Some people might wonder, why aren't other Chinese apps not a threat to national security? Is this all a very confused thing we're going through?
President-elect Trump, who once endorsed a ban, that is of TikTok, now wants to save the app and has suggested he will issue an executive order to show he means business. Trump invited TikTok head Shou Chew to his inauguration on Monday. So, what's next?
So I am a little bit having mixed feelings on if President Trump were to just unilaterally halt the banning of TikTok. I mean, it was, Congress did approve it, and President Biden signed it, and so I don't want TikTok banned. I oppose this policy. I'm not sure if I think one president should just be... surely Trump can reverse executive orders by Biden, but this was also an order of Congress. So I would think that Congress has to undo it, would be my thinking. So I'm not sure that I agree, but I don't think TikTok should be banned for the obvious reason is there's a bunch of other Chinese apps they're all going to join. Apparently people are logging onto this and like interacting with Chinese people who are like, hello, I am Chinese spy, just to be funny.
I don't know if we can go down the Chinese. I enjoyed your Australian impersonation earlier. I don't know if we can.
It's going to be too offensive to do a Chinese accent.
Getting down the Chinese
impersonation. I'll leave it right there.
Right, is tricky. Look, I think that as a good conservative, I would imagine you would see this as one of the things where change brings unintended and often baleful consequences. Because what indeed is the purpose of banning one app owned, or I shouldn't say owned by the Chinese government,
influenced
by the Chinese government.
The market finds a way.
It
if
does.
There is a demand for this product, the market will find a way.
And if Taylor Lorenz is joining, you'll be rushing to join up.
My dear friend Taylor Lorenz. So the technical reason, if you want to know why one is banned and one is not, is the structure of the law that was passed by Congress gives certain qualifications for whether you fall under the terms of the ban. And again, it's not technically a ban. It is that the app must be sold to an American company. And so there are these criteria. That was actually what led me to be against this law, is because I thought those criteria were way too broad. Now, there are criteria for how big the platform is itself, how many users it has, how much money it has, what percent, I don't remember exactly, what percentage of this and that. But there was also word phrasing has to do with how much is foreign controlled that made me very nervous, because they were saying that, I mean, they, being the mainstream media, were saying that Facebook was foreign directed because of how many Russian bots there were on the platform. There actually weren't that many, but just the panic from mainstream people on how controlled, remember all the narrative, controlled by Russia, controlled by this and that. I'm like, well, this could be used to go after X and Facebook. So I thought that was not... I was worried about giving a national security justification to Congress to just punish dissident speech on platforms.
Yeah, I think we both have mixed feelings and are basically against a TikTok ban. Now, I come from it from a related but slightly different perspective than you, which is that I just kind of feel it is being singled out for in reasons that I'm not entirely persuaded of.
And were reasons they won't tell you about.
Right,
Right.
exactly.
This is all secret. They briefed Congress and won't tell you.
Right.
Gorsuch raised this point in the hearing before the Supreme Court. He's like, well, you're expecting people to defend something, and you're saying this is a problem, but you won't show anybody the evidence.
Right. And related to that, I mean, TikTok claims that they have 170 million American users. I think beyond the principles and theories as to why it should or shouldn't be banned, the practical possibility or idea of banning something that 170 million people in the country use, like that is obviously not going to be easy to do. Yes, you can ban people, the app stores making it available, and you can ban updates, but then where do all those people go? The idea that people do not try to find some workaround seems fanciful, and from what we're seeing, the workaround is just to join other Chinese apps, and then do you go around trying to, play whack-a-mole with various different apps.
Right. Does Elon Musk end up buying it, and then you get monopoly consolidation of the social media apps, which is what
my
progressives
nightmare
are
scenario. I would want ByteDance to keep control of it to avoid that scenario.
But yeah, to your point about how many people use it, this is something Rand Paul mentioned when he came out against this action and spoke against it on the Senate floor. Is like, yeah, 170 million users. This is a pretty aggressive intervention into the marketplace, into private behavior. This is so popular among young people. We're old fogies in Congress who poorly understand. This comes across so clearly every time they question Shou Chew or Mark Zuckerberg or whoever it is before Congress, that the actual people doing the regulation do not understand. It's, your grandparents. We love our grandparents and our great-grandparents.
Absolutely.
They
Not
are
tech
often
experts.
the first people to admit that they should not be in charge of tech policy. I mean, I'm 36. I'm too old to understand exactly how TikTok. TikTok is not my preferred social media app. I'm not very active on it because I'm obviously there are people older than me who use it, but
like
it's
me,
just not.
for example.
Are you active
I am
on TikTok?
What is going to happen to my 700
no.
followers or whatever modest number I have if it's all bad?
Maybe I'm not as smart as other people. I use Instagram a lot. You can follow me on Instagram. I use Twitter a lot. You can follow me on Twitter. I don't have space in my brain for like another social media
I've
platform.
never been
I'm
on
maxed
Instagram
out.
for that reason. I don't know. Instagram just doesn't agree with me. But you can find me on X and Facebook if you feel inclined. And TikTok up until Sunday. And then it'll all maybe banned.
So we're going to have to find out what people are doing once they leave TikTok. They're going to these other sites.
Right.
Maybe they will be using. Instagram is somewhat similar. There's Snapchat, which I don't really has the exact functionality. Although I do have a Snap account, and people can share videos and decide how many people are seeing them. But I think that's more. Just for people I want to see it, where TikTok is for anyone could happen across this if the algorithm is directing them to it.
Right.
And it'll be an effect on businesses that use that to generate publicity and revenue. So it will be a significant thing that will happen this weekend unless there's some last-minute business intervention, which I think could happen. The Supreme Court they're not going to take action over the weekend, I don't think. They're just waiting. I don't know, they're running out the clock there. Or we'll see if Donald Trump makes some order concerning it. It could happen. Next up, the FDA is adopting a ban on red dye number 3. Would you be surprised to learn RFK Jr. has actually been pushing for that for years? We'll discuss it coming up next. The FDA made a major move yesterday banning red dye number 3, an additive used in certain kinds of food to color it.
The dye can be found in various candies, baked goods, sodas, and more. Advocacy groups had written a petition in November 2022 calling for the dye to be banned, citing links to cancer.
President-elect Trump's Health and Human Services pick, Robert F. Kennedy Jr., has criticized food dyes and other chemicals found in foods and drinks and has vowed to crack down on them if he becomes HHS secretary. Activist and filmmaker Robby Soave wrote on X, "To be extremely clear, the FDA is banning only red number 3, but has not taken action on red number 40. It's my hope RFK and the MAHA crew can get red 40, I keep reading red as ready, red 40 and other harmful dyes out of the food that American kids eat every day. Writer and internet personality Lauren Lee wrote, after decades of silence, cries from the MAHA movement finally pushed this poison off of our shelves. Are we witnessing the RFK Jr. effect?
Speaking of RFK Jr., the Daily Beast reported yesterday that Kennedy has made over $2 million from his non-profit Children's Health Defense, which is very critical, to put it mildly, of certain vaccines and the CDC's childhood schedule of vaccinations. Here's Kennedy on Tucker Carlson's Fox show back in 2017 discussing vaccines.
I don't know what to think of that. I have many children. I had them all vaccinated. I'm not against vaccines. But I am for asking sincere questions, and I suspect... Exactly. I'm deeply suspicious of people who shout down those questions on the basis of the fact they're unfashionable. So I still don't understand why all of a sudden you're not allowed to ask sincere questions. I don't think you're getting paid for this, are you?
No, I'm not. In fact, I'm getting unpaid for this. It's been probably the worst career move that I've ever made.
Kennedy said the current issue over his financial disclosures was an inadvertent error because he confused gross wages with net pay. That's according to that story in the Daily Beast. The Trump transition team admitted to the Beast that Kennedy's personal financial disclosures were incorrectly reported.
So red dye number 3 has really taken a beating in the media.
I hope you're not going to ask me my expertise on red dye number 3, which is limited, but go ahead.
Mine as well. But this is something RFK Jr. has been railing against. And I think what I would say is, you know, there's a lot of Democratic contention, not universal, that RFK Jr. is just universally a crank or crazy. This is one of his big ideas. It's being implemented by the Biden administration prior to him taking over. So you can't say that, while I do think he is outside the norm, and I do not agree with some of what he has to say about the vaccine, a lot of what he has to say about the vaccines himself. I agree with him on mandating them and censorship around questions about them. His views on health advocacy or making food products safer from like a consumer welfare standpoint is standard issue Democratic Party stuff, has been for years, and I think some of that has been forgotten. Now, for myself, because I am not a standard issue Democratic Party person, I actually have a lot of questions about whether on the basis of some activist group saying there are links to cancer, we discussed this earlier, everything has links to cancer if you squint at it. The human condition is to eventually die of something. Does
you're not taking the pro-cancer position here. Robby Soave doesn't care about cancer.
Well, I'm not for the inevitable decline of the human body, but it takes place. Is this actually scientifically demonstrated enough that that the government should forbid a food company from putting this in their food? Again, you don't have to eat the food. You can read what's on it and decide you don't want this stuff. And
we were talking about Costco earlier. When you're making your rounds at Costco, how many times do you read the food packaging to determine what?
Well, I'm not making any of my rounds at Costco because of all that suffocating wokeness. I can't even breathe.
Well, when you're preparing your meals for the week, do you read every food label closely?
I do not, but I look at the labels on food, and I cook a lot of my own food. I am pretty health conscious. I've become a lot more health conscious, I would say, in the last year. I don't, I eat out if I'm going out with friends or something, but I never, if I'm just in my apartment, I never order food for myself, ever. I know everybody does this. Everybody DoorDashes everything. I never do that. I have plain chicken that I brought from the grocery store, plain pork, taco meat, a steak, and I cook those things for myself. There's no red dye making its way in there because it's just raw meat, getting spices, going in the oven.
They're not afflicted by any additives. Well, no. unless they're the additives, unless they're.
Well, there might be additives. There are some additives in the not red dye, but
exactly.
So I'm reading. Well, go ahead.
So on the point of additives generally and chemicals being added in food, I, like many people, am skeptical of that, and I think that it is notable that the United States does allow lots of substances to be used in the food production process generally that the European Union, for example, does not do. And I think that is something to be concerned about. that is one of the rare occasions where I agree with Robert F. Kennedy Jr., who I am, I think, much more skeptical than you are in general, because I don't like his extreme skepticism about vaccines. There was the famous instance where a story had to be retracted from Salon and Rolling Stone years ago because it wasn't supportable. There was another controversy that I've spoken about before in American Samoa, where he got involved with promoting or associating with anti-vax activists, and basically subsequently a number of people died from an outbreak of measles, if I'm remembering correctly. Certainly an outbreak of some preventable disease. So I don't like his overall stance, because I think some of the more reasonable parts of it are kind of a Trojan horse for a dangerous agenda. But I'm, as I said when we were bantering at the start, I'm not an expert by any stretch of red dye number 3, so I don't know.
I have just been looking through. Maybe we can try to get him on the show next week. He's been on the past. Vinay Prasad, who is a doctor with some heterodox views on mandating vaccination, certainly. I was just actually reading his Substack on his thoughts on this, and he was actually, so I've seen a lot of people saying, well, isn't it insane that there are the standards for whether you can put red dye in medicine were stricter than whether you could put them in food? And he's saying that's actually not that crazy if you think about it, because if it's going in, the drug is the government is saying when it allows the drug that this is good for you, you should take this. It's going to get a variety of government subs. It has to do with our healthcare coverage and all of that. It's covered, so it's subsidized. So there's a high standard for proving that this is safe and should be in a medical product. In a food product, well, I mean, again, that's your choice whether you buy it off the shelf or not. So the threshold there actually should be lower. And I'm just reading his Substack. It's hilarious. He's saying it's similar to so he thinks the evidence has not been. I think if I'm kind of processing this as we're talking about it. He's saying he doesn't think the evidence there is so necessarily overwhelming at this point, and that he too much, there's health experts come in, say something is bad and ought to be banned, and then so instead of that product, we use a different product, and then they come in and say, wait, actually that product is worse for you than that product, we should all switch back. It's like, well, the problem is we never should have made the switch in the first place, and a little bit of that is going on. He says that's very true of the seed oil debate, which all sorts of people have been having. He writes that we used to make fries in tallow, they tasted good, then some moron said vegetable oil is healthier. That's a lie, no evidence supports that. We never should have switched, but now the same moron is saying we should switch back. You know what I mean? It's like new people come in and say, I remember when I was a kid in the 90s, remember the food pyramid? Do you remember that thing?
Yeah.
The government saying, why are you not eating bread right now?
Right.
Stuff more bread in your face or you'll probably die. It was like you could not possibly have enough bread a day. And then we had the whole low-carb thing came on, which, as far as I can tell, it makes a lot more sense than the stuff your face with bread at every opportunity.
Yeah, no, I think that's right. I think, just eating natural foods when you can is generally a good thing. Although I don't normally eat fries, and I had delicious fries last night. I don't know what kind of fat they were.
Where did you have delicious fries?
I had them from a burger place close to my house here in DC, Z Burger. But anyway, yeah.
Well, you're all welcome at Chef Robby's house, where we're eating very
healthy food.
Healthy chicken, pork, etc. Next up on Rising, we'll discuss Bill Burr's comments on the California fires that are causing such a stir on X. Comedian Bill Burr's latest comments on the California wildfires have caused a bit of a stir online.
Here he is on Jimmy Kimmel.
Good to see you. I heard you had to evacuate your home.
Yes, like most people I had to. I got lucky, the winds moved, but, the fire was coming and all that stuff, so I feel lucky.
Are you guys back in?
And I think everybody did a great job.
Yeah.
Unlike the internet,
Yeah, right, I know, it's right.
Oh, my God. All of these fire experts. Why didn't you just fly a helicopter into the ocean? And then just, I don't know, because there was 100-knot winds? You want to do that? You want to do that at night, you lunatic? Mismanaged, like some idiot on the internet knows how to manage the worst fire in LA, sitting there in his underwear. You know what? Looking at the footage on the internet, I have determined that this here was mismanaged.
Comedian Theo Vaughn took to X and wrote, Bill Burr, ladies and gentlemen, the best. Podcaster Victor Shee said, "This is why comedy is so effective at the moment. It exposes how ridiculous and ludicrous some of what they're saying is."
Some others didn't show as much praise. Podcaster Tim Pool wrote, "Emptied reservoirs, failure to build the reservoirs voted on 10 years ago, insufficient staffing, budget cuts, failure to manage brush and forest floor despite warning every year for the last 10, 1 week advance warning on fires, 45-minute delays to dispatch LAFD, dispatch crew underserved, and we don't call out all the errors in management. It will happen again." Comedian Sam Tripoli had a bit more of a nuanced take, writing in part, "Man, I absolutely love Bill Burr. Been a huge fan for over 20 years. It's been a blessing to watch him evolve, seeing him work out new material. It's like getting a masterclass in comedy, but I have to say, his take on people doing their own research about the management of the LA fires is exactly like his take on COVID and masks, which, let's be honest, he got completely wrong. This kind of stance risks alienating his blue-collar, hardworking fan base." I think that's actually very well said, and I would associate myself with those comments. I, too, think Bill Burr is generally hilarious. He's very funny. I think he's a great actor. I've loved him in on The Chappelle Show, on Breaking Bad. I even loved him on The Mandalorian. He had a little role in 2 episodes of the Star Wars show. He's great, he's insightful, and it's fine if I don't always agree with him. I don't think comedy should always have to be appealing to me or be making political points I agree with. Certainly, it is fine to make fun of random people saying, why didn't they try to put out the fire that way? Yes, it is fair to people just spouting off on the internet don't have expertise on everything. Fine. But that's one danger. Another danger is just naively assuming that at all times the people in charge are doing a perfect job and everything is fine and going according to plan, because just because there's a press release from the fire department or the police department or the mayor's office saying we are all doing our best and it all went so satisfactorily great, you don't, it's a democracy. You don't have to live with that.
Well,
and we can criticize experts because experts, like that person points out relating to COVID, do get things wrong.
Well, we can also criticize, for example, a president-elect of the United States who puts out a completely fallacious claim that this is in some way related to smelt fish in a completely different part of the state and to water management in that respect. So the idea that I think that sometimes comes up on the populist right, that, whoa, you can't trust the experts, is very selectively applied often. Now, I do agree with Bill Burr. I also find him very funny in general, but one of my whole objections to the way the debate about the wildfires has been conducted is some of the best known claims about quote-unquote mismanagement have just been nonsense. So the smelt fish I've already mentioned. Mm-hmm. It's an issue related to a different part of the state that has no bearing on water levels. There is often cited this idea that there were cuts to the fire department. It is, in fact, debatable whether there were cuts at all, because
cuts to the budget.
There was some part of the budget where it was cut by about 2%, and then there was a separate provision made for pay raises, which people say ultimately made the budget slightly bigger. But the point is,
I'm used to liberals screaming about a 2% budget.
And I am used to conservatives saying government is too big. Why don't we cut it more vigorously?
I'm your huckleberry.
Does anyone really, is the argument really that a 2% cut to the fire department's budget caused this problem in fighting wildfires? What happened is really very clear. The wildfires broke out with 99-mile-per-hour winds. In 99-mile-per-hour winds, you cannot put aircraft in the air, which is what Bill Burr was alluding to.
No, I agree with that. That is very clear, yes.
And there is no effective way of fighting wildfires on a large scale from a fire hydrant system, because the demands on the water are simply too great.
I have not seen, I could be wrong, I have not seen a lot of people or people on the right saying that why aren't there more helicopters in the air. I have not seen that being made. Maybe it is being made. But
their argument is the hydrants ran dry. The hydrants ran dry after the demand for water from them was quadruple its usual level for 15 hours. Now, there has been enormous amounts of good reporting done on this by the LA Times and elsewhere, and people who are really expert in this area. And the argument is, well, if there are going to be heavy winds and wildfires, can we not do anything about it? And people who know a lot more about this than, frankly, either you or I or Bill Burr or Jimmy Kimmel say, well, You could, but to do that, you would need to spend an astronomical amount of money to build in enormous redundancy in the hydrant-based water supply in order to do it. So anyway, my basic point is there's just been a lot of demagoguery and misinformation in the criticisms of it, in my view.
I think there has been some. I don't disagree with that. I don't think it's demagoguery to criticize Karen Bass for not being there when she promised never to travel outside the country. I think criticism of her is perfectly well deserved.
But in what sense would it have, if she was sitting in LA rather than on a plane, how would that have changed the actual response to the fire?
It wouldn't. She's just the leader of the city and should and made a promise to be there. And also there were warnings that this was coming. It was predicted not months in advance, but sometime in advance. So maybe she should have canceled her trip. That's a point that it's not just right-wing people who think that. Li Fang made that point. In terms of actually having better fire management, and you're right to say that I am not pretending to be an expert on this at all. People I know on sort of my side of the political spectrum, libertarian people, when it comes to the LA or just wildfires in California, I think tend to argue that there needs to be better forest management policies, controlled burns, those kinds of things. And for various reasons, those are difficult to do under existing law, and we need to have some updates to those procedures. But maybe I'll check in with those people and give you a more tangible response to.
Well, I mean, even in that regard, now there may, I mean, that point, I'm not 100% clear on whether that was a major contributory factor, but Newsom is often criticized for that. And Newsom has pointed out that the vast majority of forestry in the state of California is controlled by the federal government, not by the state of California. So look, that's a whole separate issue. The point
that is an issue. Actually, I think that is an important issue. The federal government just controls too much land in general that would be better, in my view, administered by the states. I mean, they own so much of,
everywhere.
Things of the west of where we live, and more of that. It would be good if the Interior Department turned that over to the states. I would be in favor of that.
A point of agreement.
All right, that does it for us today on Rising. Thanks so much for tuning in. Be sure to like, share, and subscribe so you never miss any of our content. For those of you who like to listen while on the go, we're now available anywhere you listen to podcasts. I will see you next week. Niall will see you back here tomorrow.
I will be back
with
tomorrow.
Amber.
Yep.
Have a good one.